This morning, I want to turn now to Pete King, congressman from New York, who is the senior Republican on the Homeland Security Committee in the House. If Republicans do take the House, you'll be the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee.
So.
I know you're well briefed up on all of this. What do you make of the way this was handled?
Let me say, in the past, to be honest, I've had differences with John Brennan, but let me make it clear. In this particular matter, I think the administration is handling it perfectly. They received actionable intelligence. They shared it with their allies. They did what had to be done. The FBI, the TSA especially under John Pistole, they did what they had to do. They shared it with local police like the NYPD here in New York. So everything was done right, and they continue to do it right, and I give them full credit.
This was a big one, wasn't it?
It really was. If we had not gotten that intelligence from the Saudis, you would have seen, again, at least 2 planes go up, or maybe the synagogues. And it shows that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, I think, is emerging as the major force now in the Islamic terrorist world. They're in some ways supplanting bin Laden. They had the plot last year in Detroit. Now they had this one. And also Major Hassan at Fort Hood. Al-Awlaki in Yemen was also behind that. So, no, that is, I believe, the new major battleground in the war against terrorism.
Okay, well, let's talk some politics, because that's what I asked all of you to come here to talk about today. And Governor Rendell, Ed Rendell, governor of Pennsylvania, it looks like the wind is really blowing the Republicans' way this time. What happened? What did the Democrats do wrong here?
Well, first, Bob, let me just say I slightly disagree. I've sensed, and I've been out campaigning the last couple of weeks, I've sensed that if this is a Republican tidal wave, I've sensed a Democratic undertow going against it. Democrats are much more fired up in the last 2 weeks than people would think. African-American voters, I was in a subway station, they're on fire because of the attacks by Mitch McConnell on the president. They know what's at stake here. Gay voters, they know that they're in the crosshairs. They're on fire. Latino voters in Allentown, Pennsylvania, are riled up. So I think there's going to be some surprises. I'm not saying we're necessarily going to hold on to the House, but I think there are going to be some surprises on Election Day, and particularly in Pennsylvania.
Well, back to my point, though.
What happened? Bad communications. I think this administration has done a great job. You go through the things we've accomplished. Lilly Ledbetter, 4 million more kids in CHIP, credit card reform, financial reform, college loan reform, the stimulus, which clearly, according to the CBO, has saved a lot of jobs. Healthcare, which has done great things in this year, 5 or 6 great things, like people with pre-existing illnesses 25 years and younger can't be disqualified for health care. We just did a lousy job communicating it. We let the Republicans, to their credit, outspin us a year and a half ago, and we're paying the price.
Governor Pawlenty out there in Minnesota, you've been out in the country, too. I know you're traveling around right now. From your point of view, what's this election all about, and why do you, because I'm sure you're going to tell me that the wind is blowing the Republicans' way, and why is that?
Well, it clearly is, Bob, and with all due respect to my good friend Ed Rendell, I don't think it's about communication. I think it's about the product. They're trying to sell something that isn't any good, and what we have now is an economy that remains in the doldrums. We have people reacting very negatively to Obamacare and the overreach of the federal government in that regard as just one example of many overreaches. And then, of course, you have a sense that the government's out of control as measured by spending and a lot of other measurements. So people are angry. They're also worried about the future. And they're saying this is not what we thought we were getting when we elected President Obama and the Democratic Congress. Now the pendulum is clearly swinging back towards Republicans.
Let's see what your colleague from Minnesota, who comes from the other side of the aisle, as it were, what do you think Democrats need to do now? But let's get back past these next couple of days, because I'm not sure the next couple of days matter very much. But there are going to be a lot more Republicans in Washington, whether or not the Republicans take the House, as many people think they will. What should the stance of the Democratic Party be right now, Senator?
Well, I believe, first of all, we have to come together on a competitive agenda for this country with the president in the lead. He's already talked about increasing exports. That's what people need to hear. I was up in northern Minnesota just last week. The mines are hiring up there. And a guy came up to me and said, you know, I've been out of work, and I'm finally back at work. And thank you for extending that unemployment, or I would have lost my house. So you have to look at this time period, as Governor Rendell suggested, as 21 months where we've been stabilizing things. Now it's time to move forward. And I appreciated Congressman King's words about the administration's handling of this latest terror incident, because that's what we're going to need going forward. I think courage is not necessarily going to be standing up alone in the coming years. It's going to be standing next to someone you don't always agree with to work for this country.
Do you really think there's any chance of that? I mean, we look back to to the Clinton administration. Bill Clinton elected, then he lost the House of Representatives 2 years in, but he sort of re-gauged, recalibrated, and managed to actually get some things done. Do you think there's any chance of that?
I do, because I think that's what the American people want right now. They want us to move forward on education reform. They know that we're losing ground internationally and that we have to move forward on getting our university research and turn it into products, turning it into jobs, doing more with innovation. They see a path forward, and they expect leaders, and I think the president is ideal with this because he understands that he needs to kind of buck where we've been and move forward, that's what they want to see, and that's what they want to see in Congress. I do think there should be some shifting of priorities to focus more on the economy and jobs, and that's what, when you look at these candidates out there, and I agree with the Governor Rendell, there's 3 more days here, and the people of this country are going to have to decide, do they want to put people in that are going to face these problems, that are going to face the nation, or do they want to see people who are going to throw a bunch of flames in there and divide the nation?
Well, Pete King, what do you think? I mean, you were around when Republicans took the House the last time around. They started out really well, but a lot of people thought they, in the end, overplayed their hand and gave Bill Clinton a chance to actually get some things done that was not in their particular interest or not the way they wanted to go.
Yeah, the first year in 1995 was a tough year, and but I think the Republicans, if we do win, we'll have a mandate, though, to start cutting back on spending. If we just come in and just start splitting the difference with the president, then to me we'll be turning our back on the voters that elected. We have a mandate to start reducing spending, getting spending under control. That right now is the main priority of the American people. That's what John Boehner and the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives absolutely committed to, and that's what we have to get started on. Obviously, on issues of foreign policy, Senator Klobuchar mentioned education reform. I think there's certainly room for compromise, if you will. Not even compromise, working together. But I think on basic issues of spending, we see it as our mandate, if there is to get spending under control.
I just see a man behind you and over your shoulder shaking his head.
Yeah, every poll, Bob, shows that's not the #1 priority of the American people. The #1 priority of the American people is, as Senator Klobuchar said, jobs and the economy. That's what we've got to focus on more than anything else. And if it means spending money on infrastructure like the president has proposed and creating thousands of well-paying jobs on construction sites and factories, the Congress better get to it.
Well, if I could just come back to the governor on that. One of the reasons we are right now winning seat after seat, it looks like, in the House of Representatives, our candidates are stressing reducing spending. So while the governor may not see that, I think in the seats that we're going to win, if we do win them, it's going to be because of a pledge to cut back on spending. If we ever reneged on that pledge, then we just look like another group of politicians coming in. We have to make this year different from others.
But there's good spending and bad spending, and that's what the American people want to see us decide.
And the Deficit Commission's coming out in December. I think it's going to be really important to look at what they do to move forward. And also, I just don't think the answer is giving millionaires $100,000 checks. So I'm hopeful that we're going to come together to reduce this deficit. It has to be.
Let's bring Governor Pawlenty in, because I don't want to forget him out there. Governor, weigh in here.
Well, Bob, of course the issue is jobs and the economy, but that's the great debate, which is the Democrats' view of it is to do that through government and more stimulus-style spending, to have government-centric approaches to solutions like health care, dragging it into Washington, D.C., top-down, command and control, government bureaucracies running systems. And the Republicans and conservatives are making the case that doesn't work, hasn't worked, won't work, and we have to stimulate the private economy. We've got to do things to encourage investors and small business leaders and people who are going to grow jobs by reducing tax burdens, reducing costs, reducing government spending. It's two very different worldviews, and frankly, the American people has heard those arguments, and they're saying through this election, as you'll see on Tuesday, we agree with the Republicans on this one.
All right, we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back and talk about this some more in 1 minute. And we're back with our roundtable of elected officials and campaign experts. I'm going to go to Amy Klobuchar, because one of the things immediately after this election, the president and congressional leaders are going to have to decide, do they want to call the Congress back for a lame duck session and deal with these extensions of the Bush tax cuts? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think ought to happen?
I think we have to do that. The middle class has to get more than a few Tootsie Rolls in their treat bag for Halloween here. We just can't keep this policy of having the wealthiest get the biggest chunk of these tax cuts. So extending the tax cuts for the middle class, then looking at what we should do with the wealthiest when we have a trillion-some-dollar budget deficit. There's two proposals out there, Bob. One is that we could continue the $250,000 and above tax cuts for the Bush tax cuts for another year or two and then phase them out. Or we could immediately say, for people making over $1 million, your tax cuts are done, you get them up to $1 million, and then you go back to the Clinton levels. I just don't think that that is going to disrupt our economy. In fact, things were a lot better when Bill Clinton was president. So those are two compromises that have been out there. But clearly, we have to do a combination of making sure the middle class get these tax cuts, then at the same time figuring out how we do it so that we get some money back on the deficit.
Do you think they'll act on this after the election?
Yeah, I think something has to be done. And actually, it's only the last few weeks we've heard any talk of compromise at all. But I think we should extend the tax cuts. As John Kennedy said, a good Democrat back in 1963, a rising tide lifts all boats. We shouldn't get into class warfare. And the so-called millionaires, many of them are small businesses, and they're the small businesses that produce a great number of the jobs that are the engine of our economy. I believe the worst thing to do is sort of raising taxes on anyone as we're trying to come out of this economic recession.
Governor, how do you pay for this, though? That's
You can't. And the truth is, and Americans are going to have to deal with this sooner or later, if you extend all the tax cuts for another 10 years, it adds $4 trillion to the deficit. Everything else, all the government spending, is minuscule compared to what it would add. What I would do if I were king of the world, what I would do is I'd extend the middle-class tax cuts for 2 years, eliminate everything else, and even phase the middle-class tax cuts out and get us back to Clinton levels after the economy recovers. It's the only way we're going to get control of the deficit, and we have to start talking honestly to the American people. The Republicans, no offense to Peter, who's a very good guy, but the Republicans say the deficits are most important. Oh, yeah, except when tax cuts are concerned, we're going to add $4 trillion to the deficit.
Governor Pawlenty out there, you've been traveling around the country. How concerned are people? Do you see that as the number one issue out there right now? I mean, I think we all agree the economy's in the dump, and that's the overriding issue. But this idea of these, what to do about these tax cuts?
Well, Bob, when you ask the American people, you talk to them in the bakeries or hardware stores or in gatherings, what they'll tell you first and foremost, of course, is jobs, as you noted. But secondly is government spending, and they want it reduced, and they want the economy also to move forward positively. In my view, history shows and good economic theory shows if you reduce taxes, you're going to have more economic activity. If you don't extend those Bush tax cuts, all of them, it's going to send a very negative signal to the economy. It's going to be counterproductive. But on the spending side, we shouldn't just talk about paying for tax cuts. We should also talk about paying for the spending in the federal government that's on autopilot. And we need to have, as Ed Rendell said, a very honest discussion, look the American people in the camera and say there's going to have to be, in the eye, and say there's going to have to be some changes, and particularly in the entitlement programs. And we're going to have to start bringing up those issues and be open and transparent and candid about it. But we can't get federal government spending under control unless you're willing to tackle those entitlement programs. That's what's going to cause the problem.
I just want to talk a little straight politics here. Now, all of you all have been out campaigning for one person or another. Give me your idea, Senator Klobuchar, of the races we ought to be watching.
Well, first of all, I feel good about the Senate right now in terms of what's going to happen at the end of this election. I think we're winning California. I think we're ahead in Washington. 75% of the votes there have already been cast. You look over in West Virginia, where Governor Manchin has pretty much opened up a lead there. And then you go across the country, and you see things in Alaska where the Republican candidate there came out in favor of getting rid of the minimum wage. They're going down. My friend Michael Bennett in Colorado is in a tight race in Colorado, but doing incredibly well. There's just, you go through the state, I think people have just stepped back a little and say, we want to continue to govern and move forward, and we're concerned about the extreme views of some of these candidates.
We were very tight on time here, Congressman.
In New York, we can take 5 or 6 seats. Right now, it's 27-2. We can take 5, 6, 7 seats. A race to look at. John Laughlin, Rhode Island won. Patrick Kennedy's seat. I think we're going to take that back.
Sestak Toomey in Pennsylvania. We're going to hold the Senate regardless. Amy's right. But if Joe Sestak wins, we're going to have a very comfortable margin in the Senate.
And Governor Pawlenty out there in Minnesota.
Well, as Vice Chair of the Republican Governors Association, I'll focus on the governor's races, Bob. We'll go from 24 to at least 30 and probably well north of 30. You're going to see a couple surprises there, maybe in Maine. But you'll also see most of the Great Lakes states switch from mostly blue now back to red. That's going to be a bellwether for things to come.
All right. Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us this morning. It's always fun to talk about politics. Of course, the sign of the times, we had to start the broadcast this morning with the latest on terrorism because it's the issue that hangs is over all of this, and it is, and we just have to recognize that. Back with some final thoughts in just a minute.